Finn and Bridget's discovery began with a single question that gnawed at Finn's conscience. Why had Liam Spencer's medical records been so meticulously scrubbed of the basic diagnostic entries one would expect for a patient with a suspected brain tumor? Motivated by whispers of inconsistencies and the sudden, staggering bill that Bill Spencer had agreed to cover for Grace Buckingham's so-called revolutionary treatment, Finn, ever the dogged neurologist, recruited his former sister-in-law Bridget Forrester to help him dig into the paper trail. Bound by the trust they both felt toward Liam and by their mutual distrust of Grace's immaculate confidence, they pored over admissions notes, dosage logs, shipping manifests for controlled substances, and internal memos. What they unearthed was nothing short of a calculated conspiracy. Grace Buckingham and Dr. Adhikari had never awaited the results of an independent radiology reading. Instead, they had self-diagnosed a malignant neoplasm in Liam's brain based on ambiguous scans and then drafted a treatment plan that prescribed powerful sedatives and hallucinogens in doses sufficient to induce dizziness, confusion, even temporary amnesia. Their theory was as audacious as it was cruel. By chemically blurring Liam's cognitive functions, they could manufacture the appearance of a patient in crisis, a man teetering on the brink of collapse, and thus leverage Bill Spencer's fear to secure funding that ran into the millions for experimental neurosurgery, funding that would fill Grace's coffers and bankroll Adhikari's fledgling research into neuropharmacology. As Finn traced the chain of custody for each vial of sedative, he realized with mounting dread that not only had Grace and Adhikari falsified physician orders, forging signatures and approving dosages without legal authority, but they had also manipulated lab reports to show elevated toxicology readings that would prove Liam's worsening condition. Bridget, accustomed to the ruthless calculus of power plays in the design world, was horrified to learn that this same principle had been applied to a human life. Together, they confronted hospital administration with their findings, time-stamped emails that proved the duo had ordered extra painkillers on Grace's personal credit card, intercepted phone calls discussing how best to present the case to Bill Spencer, and digital footprints showing deleted entries in the electronic medical record. The hospital, faced with irrefutable proof of gross misconduct, called an emergency meeting of the Medical Board of California, broadcasting the spectacle of the panel convened under fluorescent lights in a stark conference room. As the board president read the charges, unauthorized practice of medicine, prescription fraud, patient endangerment, financial exploitation of a vulnerable patient, Grace sat at the front row, pale but defiantly composed, while Dr. Adhikari shrank into the seat beside her, his professional reputation unraveling with every intoned allegation. Before the board, Finn delivered a sobering account of Liam's treatment course, detailing how each artificially induced symptom had been choreographed to appear as the ravages of a malignant tumor, and how only when the sedative ceased did Liam's neurological function return to normal, calling into question the very existence of the tumor itself. Bridget, called as a witness to the psychiatric evaluation that Bill had requested at Finn's suggestion, recounted how Liam's dramatic improvement coincided precisely with the cessation of Grace's treatment, demonstrating that the entire condition had been self-inflicted. As the room held its breath, the board president pressed Grace for an explanation. She attempted to defend her actions as necessary steps in pioneering a treatment protocol for aggressive brain tumors that standard procedures had failed to address. But her carefully curated argument collapsed under scrutiny when the board members produced order forms bearing forged signatures, shipping labels that traced controlled substance shipments back to Grace's private research warehouse, and audio recordings of Grace instructing a nurse to administer an unorthodox compound that was not approved by the Food and Drug Administration. With the board's unanimous decision to revoke Grace Buckingham's medical license, the next inexorable step was a criminal trial. Grace, escorted by marshals in handcuffs through the courthouse doors, faced charges of medical fraud, grand theft by deception, and elder exploitation, charges that, in the eyes of the prosecution, paled only in severity to the count of attempted homicide for administering enough sedative to kill a man. The courtroom became a theater of tension. Prosecutors set the stage with hospital charts that had been digitally resurrected by a forensic tech under Finn's supervision. Defense attorneys countered by painting Grace as a brilliant but misunderstood innovator whose techniques had been ahead of their time. And the jury listened as Bridget took the stand, describing the moment she first keyed in tumor on the radiology portal only to find no corresponding diagnostic report, a discovery that had sent chills through her very soul. Liam, seated at the witness table, testified that he had never felt the crushing headaches or seizures described in the official files until after he confronted Grace about the high-dose infusions. Infusions that, once stopped, left him symptom-free and questioning every moment he had spent believing a narrative that had been sold to him for profit. Outside the courthouse, media vans lined the street, their satellite dishes aimed skyward as reporters speculated on the trial's outcome. Banners proclaimed, "Has a hero fallen too far, and will justice find Grace?" Back inside, the prosecution played a final, devastating clip. Grace, speaking to an unseen colleague in what the jury identified as her private research facility, saying, "Once Bill signs the check, we'll wipe the records and no one will ever know," proving that every step of the scheme had been premeditated. When the judge delivered the guilty verdict on all counts, Grace's facade of calm shattered. She wept quietly as marshals led her away to begin serving a sentence that could exceed 20 years. Dr. Adhikari, convicted of conspiracy and accessory to medical fraud, faced suspension of his own license and the likely collapse of his research career. The reverberations of the verdict sent shockwaves through the medical community. Professional associations issued statements pledging greater oversight of experimental treatments. Hospitals across California began auditing their prescription practices and record-keeping protocols. And at Forrester Creations, executives debated the lessons of hubris and the price of blind trust. Meanwhile, Liam, finally free of the nightmare that had threatened his mind and his life, embarked on a campaign to advocate for patients' rights, using his harrowing experience to promote legislative changes that would protect vulnerable patients from unscrupulous practitioners. Finn and Bridget, bonded forever by their collaboration in exposing one of the most brazen medical frauds in recent memory, found in each other a shared purpose: to rebuild trust in institutions that had almost failed them both. As for Grace Buckingham, once lauded as a genius capable of miracles, she now faced the cold reality of prison walls, her name forever linked to a scandal that would serve as a cautionary tale for generations of doctors and patients alike. In the end, the courtroom's gavel had not only delivered a verdict, but had also struck at the heart of what it meant to wield medical power responsibly, reminding the world that behind every white coat lies a moral imperative and that no ambition, however noble it may appear, can excuse a betrayal of trust so profound. In the weeks that followed Grace Buckingham's spectacular downfall and incarceration, a grim silence settled over the Spencer and Forrester families, a pall of guilt and grief that refused to lift even as the California sun blazed overhead. Inside the sterile walls of state prison, Grace, once the golden girl of neuroinnovation, found herself stripped of her credentials, thrust into a world of concrete corridors and fluorescent lights that reflected her hollowed confidence. The first days were agony. Cellmates whispered of her crimes, guards eyed her with a mixture of contempt and curiosity, and every nighttime lockup brought the hollow thud of steel across the corridor, a reminder that her freedom had been sacrificed on the altar of her own hubris. She tried to reconcile her actions in solitary moments, pacing the chipped linoleum and wondering how a life devoted to saving brains had warped into a conspiracy to control them. Yet with every sunrise, she confronted the same unanswerable questions. Had her vision of curing terminal brain tumors blinded her to the human cost? Had the tens of millions she'd billed under the guise of experimental research been worth the ruin she'd wrought? Meanwhile, back at Los Angeles Memorial Hospital, the aftermath of Grace's scheme played out in the broken, haunted face of her star patient, Liam Spencer, where once he had sat upright and strong. Regal in his pain, defiant in the face of mortality, now he drifted through the halls like a man lost in a fog of his own mind. The powerful sedatives Grace and Adhikari had administered, once blamed for his collapse, turned out to have damaged the delicate synapses that underlie memory and identity. Liam's once sharp intellect was blurred, his sense of time fractured into spastic loops of fear and confusion. On good days, he could recall his daughter's names and smile at Bill's weary jokes. But on the worst days, he recoiled at the sight of an 4 drip, convinced it held another dose of the poison he blamed for his suffering. In those moments his mind conjured images of Grace in her white coat, eyes glinting with triumph as she plunged syringes into his arm, visions so vivid that he would scream and thrash, forcing nurses to sedate him further just to keep him from harming himself. As Liam's condition deteriorated, an emergency psychiatric team convened under the guidance of Dr. Finn Kelly and Dr. Bridget Forrester, who had first unearthed the medical fraud. Their task was daunting: to stabilize a man who feared every monitor, every doctor, every memory he could no longer trust. They relocated him to a quiet wing of the hospital, where daylight filtered through frosted windows and the incessant beep of machinery was replaced by the gentle hum of white noise machines. Family visits became hourly lifelines. Hope cradled his hand and whispered reassurances that faltered whenever his eyes darkened with terror. Steffi read children's books in dulcet tones, her own tears concealed behind a mask of equanimity. Bill, who had once steered Liam's life with a ruthlessly pragmatic hand, now offered soft apologies, his broad shoulders sagging under the weight of a father's guilt. But no amount of love could fully penetrate the wall of psychosis Grace had erected around his mind. In parallel to Liam's tragic decline, the legal battle against Grace took an unexpected turn when new evidence emerged suggesting that Dr. Adhikari, Grace's co-conspirator, had secretly recorded many of their conversations, including incriminating admissions about dosing schedules and forged orders, and had been holding the files as leverage ever since their arrest. The prosecution, eager to secure convictions beyond a reasonable doubt, subpoenaed his hidden hard drives, and the resulting trove of audio files cast Grace's defense into chaos. In one recording, she could be heard instructing Adhikari in precise forensic detail: make sure the serum contains enough to induce convulsions, but no more than a 60% toxicity so that Bill thinks the tumor is real. Panic buys you compliance. The jury, already primed by Bridget's eyewitness testimony and Finn's expert analysis of Liam's scans, found the additional proof overwhelming. Grace's final appeal, filed just days before her sentencing, was summarily denied. The judge, in a remark that echoed through medical circles and social media alike, declared that Grace's betrayal of the sacred trust between physician and patient warranted the maximum sentence of 25 years without the possibility of parole. As Grace was led away to begin serving her time, the world she left behind was irrevocably altered. At Forrester Creations, the scandal had forced an abrupt halt to all of Grace's ongoing charitable projects, including a fund to research pediatric brain tumors. Donors pulled their pledges, and the trust Grace had built over years dissolved like a dandelion in the wind. Stephanie and Ridge Forrester, who had once consulted Grace on the weaving of medical motifs into their runway shows, quietly removed her name from every marquee. Ivy Forrester, who had briefly sided with Grace's vision of combining technology and couture for a noble cause, found herself once again questioning the price of idealism in a world that seemed designed to punish those who dared to dream too wildly. Yet even in the midst of this collapse, Liam's progress, though agonizingly slow, offered a glimmer of hope. Finn and Bridget, entrusted now with his long-term care, devised a rigorous therapy regimen combining cognitive rehabilitation, gentle reminiscence therapy, and low-dose neuroprotective agents, none of the hallucinogens Grace had abused. Liam's first breakthrough came when Finn played a recording of Liam's own voice, captured on an old voicemail to Hope. "I promise I'll be back soon, Angel. Just you wait." Liam listened, his eyes growing wide as the familiar timbre coaxed a tremulous smile. He whispered, "That's me, isn't it?" And with that sliver of recognition, the team celebrated as though a tumor had vanished again, this time a tumor of lost memory, banished by the steady light of love and science working in harmony. Hope, determined to protect her husband's fragile mind, petitioned for a full guardianship over his medical decisions, supported by affidavits from Finn, Bridget, and a host of medical experts. Bill, chastened by the near catastrophe he had unwittingly enabled, relinquished control without protest, stepping back into the role of grandfather and ally rather than commander. Together, Hope and Liam's daughters, Beth and Kelly, decorated the rehabilitation wing with the colorful drawings they had made of their father as a superhero, a starship captain, a dragon slayer. Each portrait a testament to the hope that one day the real Liam would return in full, freed from the biochemical chains Grace had imposed. In the months that followed, public opinion began to shift from outrage at Grace's crimes to a cautious optimism for Liam's recovery and a broader conversation about the ethics of experimental medicine. Legislators introduced bills requiring more rigorous oversight of early-phase drug trials and mandatory third-party reviews for any off-label prescribing of controlled substances, measures that Finn and Bridget testified before committees to champion. The hospital installed new security protocols for prescription verifications, forged in the furnace of their recent ordeal, ensuring that no single doctor could unilaterally sanction high-risk treatments without multiple levels of scrutiny. Grace, serving her sentence in a women's penitentiary an hour north of Los Angeles, spent her days between prison-mandated therapy sessions and solitary reflection. News of Liam's tentative progress filtered through the prison grapevine, carried by sympathetic guards who had once admired her brilliance and now harbored complex feelings of empathy and contempt. She learned that Bill had established a foundation in Liam's name to support survivors of medical malpractice, and that Hope and Liam's daughters had visited him weekly. Testimonies not to her genius, but to the bonds of family unbreakable even by the cruelest betrayals. In the quiet hours before lights out, Grace would stare at the ceiling and wonder whether this was the ultimate experiment, to confront the consequences of a mind that had strayed so far from its moral center, to learn humility in a chamber of steel and regret. As for Liam, his journey toward wholeness became the heart of a new era for the Spencer legacy, one defined not by boardroom battles or high-fashion spectacles, but by the fragile, resilient web of memory and love. Each day he reclaimed a bit more of himself, a joke once shared with Steffi, the name of a cherished record he and Hope had danced to on their wedding night, the gentle cadence of his father's lullabies. And although the road ahead remained long and uncertain, the darkness that had once consumed him had given way to a cautious dawn. Bill, who had once captured the city's attention with his ruthless ambition, now found himself humbled by the slow miracle of recovery that no amount of money or machination could hasten. In the end, the tale of Grace Buckingham and Liam Spencer became a cautionary saga of brilliance corrupted and redemption born not of grand gestures but of patient, loving persistence. A story that would be told for decades as a reminder that the mind is both a temple and a battleground, and that only the purest intentions can chart a course through its most perilous depths.